mini version, but that is great. I'm grateful to have you here, and I'm grateful that Bill is a friend, so he won't fight me.
I don't mind, I'm glad.
Too many schools out this week. It was really light, earlier too. I mean, everybody was,
Is this,
there are people out of town.
is
and
this
so forth.
Easter break for Westside?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
It's Easter break for a number of schools.
Yeah.
so.
A lot of people are out of town.
So normally we start our evening with just a little bit of time to kind of breathe in and breathe out. And I ask Tracy to read a piece of scripture. So I'll just go into Tracy reading some scripture just to kind of bring us into this place together.
Great, thank you. From 2 Timothy, chapter 4. As for you, always be sober, endure suffering, do the work of an evangelist, carry out your ministry fully. As for me, I am already being poured out as a libation, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith.
Well, I picked that piece of scripture because where Bill and I started working together was
You did.
hospice.
I was a hospice volunteer. That's
Yeah.
right.
Oh.
And I know that one of the things that happened for our veterans, regardless of how they felt about their combat, if they came back as heroes or if they came back not as heroes during the Vietnam era especially, they all had to kind of revisit that question as to how they lived their life. And we felt like it was our task to get them to the point where they could say, I have fought the fight, I've run my race, and I can let go. And then Bill, not too long into that, started working on this honor flight stuff. And if I may, our hospice had a national branch, if I may tell this story. And you remember how irritated I got this? And we could write mini grants for like $1,500. And so I wanted to help fund this new honor flight thing. And I was like, oh, that's, and the whole specification was that it had to be something related to end of life. Bill was taking World War II veterans to see this memorial that they never would have seen, and I already knew how important, tying up these loose ends at the end of life was for these veterans. And you had already had one flight and already had very powerful stories, and we had a hospice patient on that flight.
You remember who it was?
I don't remember his name, but he should have been too sick to go on that flight, but boy, he gussied up for that flight. He was sure that he was going to make that flight, and then he came back, and shortly after he passed away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that flight was what he lived for, and then he was able to die in peace. So I had that story, and would you know that foundation would not fund it? They said, we fail to see how this relates to end of life. I'm like,
Is that right? Wow.
could I draw the line any clearer? And I actually went back to them. I said, okay, look, maybe you misunderstood. And I did like, boom, see here, she's got tears in her eyes. She can see. And they rejected it again. I couldn't believe it. I could not get them to fund this. So I decided there must be somebody on that board who just simply is anti-military, anti-veteran across the board and wouldn't do it. So that was kind of my, what it did for me is it kind of made me even all the more ardent about how important this work was. So we tried to get Bill here back in November, but we had like a snowstorm, I think. And so he was gracious enough to come tonight, and I'm just thrilled to have Bill here
Glad
to
to be
talk
here,
about
Kelly.
the Honor Flight story and all the work that you do to help veterans and their families come to grips with everything that they've been through. Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, let me give you the quick version of the Honor Flight story. It was fall of 2007. My wife Yvonne and I read a magazine article about Honor Flight and thought, well, why not Nebraska? So the money trickled in ever so slowly, until I got this great idea. I heard about this couple named Roy and Gloria Dinsdale, and from the hometown of Palmer. So I drive out to Palmer and I leave my business card at the general store and at the elevator and wherever else around town. So one night he calls. You were in California, right?
Could have been.
Yeah. I don't think Roy remembers this, but I remember it very clearly. I'm driving down the interstate. My cell phone rings. It's Roy Dinsdale. His son Sid's on the extension. Roy says, "How come you're following me?" And I said, "Well, I'm a nobody, but I have this thing. We want to take some World War II veterans to Washington, D.C. He says, "How about $10,000? I said, yeah, that'd be good." So that was the first big donation was from you guys, which got it started. Okay, so then the word that got out, so then the money started to roll in. Valentine's Day of '08, cell phone rang, Kara Whitney. Kara Whitney's married to Dan Whitney, whose real name is
Larry the Cable Guy.
Larry the Cable Guy.
Oh, really?
So Kara says, "What's it going to cost to send the first plane load?" I said, "Well, just the plane is $70,000. Kara said, "Done." Oh, well, this is easy.
Sweet.
So the total amount raised was $1.2 million. 1,500 World War II veterans from 250 towns around the state, including a dozen women, got to go on one of 7 flights in a year's time, spring of '08 to spring of '09. First flight was May 21st of '08. Buses pull up to the outside gate at Epley because we're going to load right on the tarmac. So they took the bomb-sniffing dogs around each of the buses. One of our veterans yelled out, "I hope those dogs can't sniff out Viagra." Well, that's a perfect example of why this was so much fun and so easy to do. No whining, no complaining. It was all about, tell me what you want me to do and I'll do my best to do it. I'm 65. Trust me. You do this for baby boomers, about a third of us are going to whine about the mustard on the turkey sandwiches, but not the World War II guys nor the Korea guys who followed. Okay, so we get past that. We go up to the plane. Now it's time for TSA screening. Now, on one hand, we're dealing with the men and the women who saved the world for democracy, right? On the other hand, just because they're World War II veterans, they're not going to let them just walk onto the plane. The problem is a third of them are carrying a weapon. What's the weapon?
A cane.
Nope.
Nice.
There you go. Very good, Roy.
What was it?
Pocket knives.
Yeah.
TSA would gather a bag of knives this deep. Captain looks out the window and says, "Bring that bag up here." Up the stairs they'd go, hand the bag to the captain. Captain would hand it to the flight attendants and say, "Give them their knives back." Okay, now on all our flights when we got to DC, we always did pretty much the same thing. World War II Memorial, over to Korea, which is also the Lincoln Memorial and the Vietnam Wall. And then we do a drive around so they can see the Capitol up close. Then out to Arlington for Tomb of the Unknowns, changing of the guard, over to Iwo Jima, out to Dulles Airport, on the plane, head home. People over the years always ask us, "I'll bet these old vets, I'll bet they all sleep on the way home, huh?" No, the joke goes that on the way home, the veterans have gotten younger and all the helpers have gotten older. Plus the fact that we bought free drinks for all the veterans on the way home, so some of these guys with the medication are about half silly by the time we get to home. Some of you might recall what happened on our second flight. This was July 7th of '08. We had a man die on the plane. I think it's up to 175,000 veterans have gone on the various flights around the country. We're the only state, amazingly, to have a veteran die on the plane, which is off the chart amazing, really. His name was Don Dragoo, and he was from Crete. And Don was supposed to go on our first flight. He got sick. We moved him to the second. We usually don't take family members, but because he was so sick, his daughter's an RN, we said, Cindy, you better go with him. So she was thrilled, he was thrilled. Don, by the way, COPD, heart disease, full-time oxygen, 92. So this was out of Lincoln. He gets his picture taken the night before at the Stadium Club with Governor Heinemann and Tom Osborne. Next day, we go to Washington. It's July 7th. It's 100 degrees. Oh, it was horrible hot. But he's having a great time. We're on the way home, and Yvonne always put the sickest guys up in the first class seats. So we're 20 minutes out of the Lincoln airport. 20 minutes. He's sitting next to his daughter. Cindy turns to her dad and says, Dad, are you feeling all right? He looked at her and he says, you know, this has been wonderful spending this day together. Whack, gone, just like that.
Whoa.
So Dr. Mike McCoy, one of the physicians on board from Lincoln, took off his concentrator and put the oxygen mask to make it look like he was treating him. Because what am I going to do? Get up on the microphone and say, ignore the man in 7A, we have a problem here. So we made it look like we were treating him. Okay. We land in Lincoln, flashing lights all over the runway because the pilots had radioed ahead medical emergency. Plus, TSA had allowed all the families to come up against the glass, so they're all watching. So the paramedics came on, took Don off, didn't take him out the jetway, they lowered him down the side. First veteran off the plane walks out in front of all the family members and said, one of the fellas just died on the plane. I mean, the guy thinks he's Paul Revere, right? So we have radio, television, newspaper reporters on board. So they all gathered around and said, what are you going to do now? I said, well, let's go. So his name is, he died at 10:49 p.m. A few hours later, I get a call from the Associated Press. Woman says, what are you going to do to change your criteria health-wise so this never happens again? I mean, I laughed. I said, are you kidding me? I said, if we only take the healthy ones, we can take those two guys and put them in a taxi cab and drive them to Washington, D.C. because they all had something wrong with them. We had a guy collapse in line at the Lincoln airport that morning who was on no medicine. He was the only guy on the whole flight that was on no medicine. Some guys had a sheet this long. Rushed to the hospital for a pacemaker. His doctor told me later, had he gotten on that plane, he said you would have lost him because you couldn't have got him down fast enough. He got his pacemaker. He went on the September flight. He died a few years ago. Yvonne and I were at the visitation. We walked up to his casket with his children, and here he was in his red honor flight shirt. That tells you what it meant to him to get to go. One of the guys we took on the first flight called me after Dragoo died. Lang said, I wish it would have been me. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm probably going to die face down in my oatmeal in the nursing home. He said, if I could die with some class, he said, I would take that today. It's all perspective, right? So at Dragoo's burial at Lincoln Memorial, we came over the hill, and here were 30 veterans who were on that second flight. A couple of women were on that flight, a couple of guys in wheelchairs, all wearing their red shirts and their VFW hats. They formed two lines from the road to the burial site. Casket came down the line with Cindy and the family behind, and they all stood as straight as they could and saluted. Never forget it. So we went in September, we went in October, we went in November. Our theory was we take as many as we can as fast as we can, because the longer you wait between flights, guys don't make it. Example, a guy named John Zamola from Fremont was supposed to go on a Tuesday flight. On Friday afternoon, his wife called in tears. She says, Bill, John doesn't get to go. He died this morning. So after that flight, Yvonne and I went up to meet her in Fremont. We took along a red shirt and a VFW hat that he would have received. And she says, I want to show you something. We took us into the bedroom. Here were his clothes laid out and the shoes shined. They'd been like that for 2 weeks waiting for the honor flight, and he didn't make it. So that's why, Kelly, when you say, because I've been at the deathbed with a number of these guys, and I've always said, you know, you're lucky to live past 1945. I mean, the combat guys. I mean, you were lucky to live past 1945, and they say, oh, absolutely. I got to live a life many did not. So, okay, so now we're down to our final World War II flight, April 23rd and 24th, 09, Operation Airlift. We took a 747 2 days in a row, out and back, out and back. A 747 has 403 seats, 65 first class, 27 in the upper deck. So we lifted off at 6 a.m. with 375 of those seats filled with red shirts, World War II vets. Off to D.C. we go. We get back about midnight. We get them all back to their hotel room, and we had every hotel room at 72nd and Grover. We had a group of volunteers, we still have a lot of them going with us now, called the Dream Team, men and women, about a dozen, who've gone most every flight. So most of the Dream Team went both days. So we all laid down for about 90 minutes, back up, out into the ballroom at the Holiday Inn Central, now Ramada Plaza. Here's a different 375, just as excited as the 375 24 hours before. Off we went again, out to D.C., came back, got them all back to their hotel room for a total of 750 in 2 days. The Annie story, people like to hear the Annie story. The manifest before every flight was very fluid because guys would get sick, not be able to go. So we never wanted to go with an empty seat. So we're down to the airlift, guy drops out. Next name on the list is Annie, and she was a WAC, Women's Army Corps, and she lived at the Wahoo Nursing Home. I called Annie and I said, guess what, Annie, you get to go. She says, there's something you need to know. She says, I am well over 250 pounds. I have one leg. She says, I will understand if you won't let me go. I said, I'll be right there. So I fly over to the Wahoo Nursing Home. I walk into her room with the administrator and the director of nursing. And here's Annie in her wheelchair, and she's big. And I walked up to her, I said, all right, Annie, here's the deal. For the firemen to get you up the stairs of a 747, they're going to have to manhandle you. If you're going to whimper and whine and carry on, you don't get to go. I just wanted to see if she had some spunk to her. Well, those two administrators walked away from me. And Annie looked up at me, she says, I can take it, but they better not get fresh with me. I said, Annie, you get to go. So we had a rush job done on a shirt that would fit her. She didn't come to the pre-flight dinner the night before. They got her up at 1 o'clock in the morning, got her dressed, got her on the wagon, brought her over to the Holiday Inn Central at that time, brought her into the ballroom, and Yvonne and I have never seen anybody so happy and so excited that she was going to get to go. So we put her on the 10th bus out with the lift, and now we're on the tarmac at Epley. Everybody's on the 747 but Annie. We picked out 5 of the biggest firemen that we could find, and I said, Annie, are you ready? She said, let's go. They picked up the whole chair. I mean, a 747 is up there. And they carried that chair with her in it up those stairs, got her turned around, put her in a first class seat. Off to D.C. we go. Doctor from Lincoln pushed her around most of the day, and an RN. Came back, down the stairs, back on the wagon, back to the Wahoo Nursing Home. She makes a scrapbook to show everybody. Starts to go downhill. They took her to Lincoln, took her other leg. She's still hanging in there, showing everybody her scrapbook. She dies, and her family told us that she talked about getting to go on the honor flight practically to her dying breath. That's Annie, the whack from Wahoo. Okay, so we thought we were done.
That's a great thought.
Until a couple of years ago. I was talking to a group of Korean War veterans. A guy raised his hand. He said, you and Yvonne raised all that money and took all those World War II guys, which is great, but when's it our turn? 25 guys turned to face the front of the room with their arms folded, heads tilted, awaiting the answer. And I remember standing there looking at them, and I said, you know, you're right. I mean, everybody here knows the deal with Korea War veterans. They're all the little brothers of the younger brothers of the World War II guys, never had the attention they deserved, have always gotten the short end of it. So we decided we have to at least try. Well, it was one tough slog finding the 100,000 because there just isn't or wasn't the empathy for Korea veterans as with World War II. But the money showed up. Off we went. It was October with 135 all combat veterans on board, the most deserving Korea veterans we could find in the state. Example was a guy who told us how they were overrun by the Chinese. Middle of the night, below zero, he's lying underneath a truck surrounded by the bodies of his buddies. The Chi-Coms are coming through with bayonets, jabbing each of the bodies. Now think about this. Pitch dark, below zero, terrified. Out of the slit of his eye, he sees them coming toward him. Dear God, help me. They get up to him, and he is bracing himself for what he considers the inevitable, when suddenly they get called away. Now, how would you not think about that every day of your life? But he got to live a life, he got to marry, raise a family, and go on the honor flight. So those are the guys we had on board. Well, that flight was a milk run. I mean, it was perfect October, D.C. weather, leaves changing, no medical trouble, got back, fine. A few days later, I'm on the morning show with Gary Saddlemeyer on KFAB explaining that we have 500 some on the list. Don't know if we could do any more flights, tough to find the money. Next morning, Gary called and he says, Omaha guy wants to help you. He's going to call you any minute. 2 minutes later, phone ring. Guy says, I want to be anonymous, but what'd you spend on that flight? I said, 100,000. He says, all right, I'll give you 100,000. So we convinced him to let us use his name because we wanted him to come to the pre-flight dinner. It's Bill Grucock. So then Yvonne and I decided, all right, let's do Operation Airlift. Let's take 3 planes, same day, 462 guys in one whack, and we're done. So that went out into the media. Ted Hubbard called. I don't know if do you know him? Ted Hubbard's late parents were early buffers. If you go to the zoo, you'll see the Hubbard Gorilla House and whatnot. When Yvonne ran the Make-A-Wish Foundation for 18 years, it was the day after 9/11, Ted walked into her office. He says, I'll bet donations are going to be down. Here's 100,000. So I'm driving down the street, phone rings, Ted Hubbard. He says, Operation Airlift, huh? And I said, yep. He says, how much are the airplanes? I said, $350,000. Which, by the way, I told Delta, we don't want to buy your planes, we just want to use them for a day. And Ted said, well, how short are you on those airplanes? I said, I don't know, a couple 100,000. Ted said, do you want me to drive over with the check? I says, no, we'll come and get it. Isn't that amazing? And that's 300,000 in a week, and another 200,000 rolled in from all over the state, which I think is because people trusted us around the state from the very beginning that it wasn't just another Omaha Lincoln thing and everybody else out. Because we took veterans from 250 towns. And the biggest break we got, Roy, I don't even think you know this, but the first newspaper to do a story was the North Platte Telegraph. Because I was out driving. It might have been when I went out to Palmer. I'll bet that's when it was. I went to North Platte. I went to the newspaper office and left my little press release. 10 minutes later, the reporter called and says, we want to do a story. Well, anyway, North Platte Telegraph did the first story, which is perfect because all those apps came in from the western part of the state, so people didn't say, all right, the fix is in, it's all Omaha Lincoln. So anyway, all these World War II guys around the state wanted these Korea guys to have the same experience. Okay, so the money rolled in on that. Pre-flight dinner was at the Ramada Plaza. Biggest crowd they've ever had in there. It was 1,500 people. Tables out in the hall. It was packed. Hal Dodd was our MC. Always does a great job for us. Big crowd. Next morning at 3 o'clock, everybody's up having breakfast. Now, I don't know about you folks, but there's nothing I enjoy more than a 2-day-old bear claw at 3 o'clock in the morning. But we load up our planes designated red, white, and blue. Pretty clever, huh? Red, white, and blue take off. We get to Washington. It was the 25th of March 2 years ago. We wanted to get in the week before the cherry blossoms because that's when everybody shows up. Well, we guessed wrong because it got hit with a storm. Icy wind, cold, snowing, it was awful. The irony of it is that it turned into a bit of a positive because that's the way Korea veterans remember Korea, except a lot worse in Korea. But there's haunting pictures, and those of you who've seen it, those soldiers walking through the field, there's haunting pictures of our guys all these years later looking up at these Korea with the ice all over them, and I mean, it was just amazing. Nebraska Educational TV did a documentary a couple of years ago. They still play it quite a bit. It's called Homecoming. And a lot of it is about that final Korea flight. But anyway, all right, so now we go through the day. Now we're on the tarmac at Dulles. We're delayed because they have to de-ice the planes. That's how bad it was. So we're late getting off the ground. We get to Omaha at 11:30. Red, white, and blue on each other's tail. We line them all 462 into one line behind a color guard and a bagpiper. And we started the march through the South Terminal at 11:30 at night on a school night. And what do these men of the Forgotten War discover but 3,000 people
Wow.
there to cheer on these men of the Forgotten War. There was Patriot Guard, Legion Riders, Elkhorn South High School Marching Band, Papillion City Band, 7 busloads of the wives that had been spending the day all over town doing things called the home front. Parents with school-aged children there to witness history, to see these guys who never got any attention, but there were 3,000 people. It was unbelievable. So, you know, I think about a guy that I talked to on our final World War II flight. It was 4:30 in the morning, and all 10 buses were lined up outside of that 747 waiting until 5 and we could start the boarding. So for 30 minutes, everybody's looking out the windows at this huge plane. I mean, it looks like the space shuttle. So I'm walking in the dark down the aisle of one of the buses, and this veteran pulled on my sleeve. He says, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." So I knelt down beside him. He looked at me and he said, "I am scared to get on that plane. I've never flown before." And I said, "Well, let's talk about it." I said, "You survived the Depression." He said, "Very, very difficult on my family." "You survived World War II, combat Pacific." I said, "How old are you?" He said, 94. 94. I said, "You survived the Depression. You survived World War II. You survived life in general." I said, "What's the worst that can happen? You die on that airplane? So what?" He looked at me and he said, "Let's go." You know, it was Will Rogers who said, "Not all of us can be heroes. Some of us need to stand on the curb and clap as they go by." And that's what we felt our job was. If I've got a couple minutes, I'll tell you a couple more stories. All right, here's what we did last November. Short version. Nebraska Football Office the last few years has called, and they'll say, "Can you recommend a World War II guy, a Korea guy that we can honor for our military appreciation game?" So they called in September or so, whatever. And with that question, I said, "You know what you guys really should do is honor the young widows and the children of the fallen from Iraq and Afghanistan." So they said, "Fine, we'll give you 30 seats behind the bench," which I've seen those seats. You can't see the field. You have to look at the scoreboard. I said, "Not good," but I said, "We'll take it." All right, so this is divine intervention. I call Sun Country, who's a charter service out of the Twin Cities. We've taken them on the honor flight a few times. I said, "What will you charge to fly from Omaha to Lincoln on a 737? How much?" She says, "Bill, you're not going to believe this." She said, "That plane is going to be sitting empty on the tarmac in Lincoln because we just happen to be the charter bringing in Michigan State."
Oh.
I said, "How much?" She says, $15,000. I said, "I'll take it." So then I got Duncan to pay for the fuel. I got it down to 11. All right, so what happened was we had 23 widows. These are the fallen from Iraq and Afghanistan. We had 22 widows and 35 children, 4 to 14. They stayed the night before, the Friday night before the game, at Camp Ashland, the National Guard camp down at Ashland. So what we did was, we had a white tablecloth, fresh flour, catered dinner for the widows. The children were taken off to boot camp, because these were single mothers, and so it was a chance for them to have some time. Okay, so after dinner, we moved them into the drill floor. Well, the drill floor was now the spa. We had the lights turned down. We had a video of a crackling fireplace put on the screen. We had a woman we hired to play the harp. Each one of the widows got a top-of-the-line, white, thick robe and slippers. Stitched into the collar, Yvonne wrote it, "May you feel the arms and prayers of your fellow Nebraskans around you when you wear this robe." We had a half dozen massage chairs and tables. We had manicurists, the woman playing the harp, the dessert bar, the wine bar. One of the wives sent an email to me a few days before. She said, some of us are apprehensive about this dredging up this pain again, and we don't know too many people. And she said, would it be okay if I bought a bottle of wine? I said, well, we have 36 donated bottles. How much do you want? I mean, it was sweet. I mean, it was really a nice deal for a couple of hours for them to relax. So the kids came back. The Lincoln Quilters gave each child his or her own quilt. Stitched in there was that same, "May you feel the arms and prayers of your Nebraskans around you." Okay, next morning, Burger King shows up, feeds everybody. Buses show up. Up the interstate we go to Epley. Motorcycle escort, police escort, big deal. We get to Epley, and there are maybe, I don't think there was 1,000, maybe 600-700 people. Signs and the band's playing, and they all wore sweatshirts that said "Remembering Our Fallen," which is what Yvonne and I do, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, we get on the airplane. Plane takes off, goes up, banks left, and the pilot says, "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are now descending into Lincoln airspace." Because it took 22 minutes on that plane. But these kids were so excited. So we get to Lincoln, and if you've been in the Lincoln airport, down the middle are steps, and then there's an escalator on each side. Anyway, they all came off the plane. The chorus is singing, the band's playing, they all lined up on those steps. It was really touching, and there was over 1,000 people. There might even been 1,500 that packed that little airport. All right, so now we're escorted over to the ROTC building, which is on the east side of the stadium. Well, we had our Remembering Our Fallen exhibit, if anybody's seen it. That's what Yvonne and I do. We create photo exhibits of the pictures of the fallen from Iraq and Afghanistan. We have half the country done now. Our goal is to create one for every state if we find some sponsor help. And then we're going to do a national tour with all 50 of them. 0.5% serve in the military today. Most people don't pay attention. It's not like World War II where everybody was in the game with scrap metal or victory gardens or whatnot. People don't pay much attention now unless it's your son or daughter. So that's our goal, is that these men and women not be forgotten. Okay, so in the ROTC building is the Nebraska Remembering Our Fallen Memorial. And we had a ceremony where we had fresh roses, and the kids were held up to put the red rose by Daddy's picture. I mean, it was really neat. Then over to the governor's mansion. And the governor was great. He could have just taken a picture outside and called it good. He called all the families in, took pictures with each family. It was great. Back to ROTC, they filled up gold helium-filled balloons, and the kids wrote notes to Daddy, tied it to the string, and then made the march to the stadium with the alumni band playing, and all the tailgaters formed a gauntlet, and there were 2 Hueys and 2 Cobras flying overhead. It was really neat. I don't know if anybody was at that game. It was Michigan State. All right, so now they were out on the field before the game. Now, what had happened was those terrible seats that I was telling you about behind the bench, well, that's totally unacceptable. So I happened to mention it to the Board of Regents, and all of a sudden they got their mind focused. Now they had 70 seats up in the VIP section. It was perfect. So they all have on their gold sweatshirts. National anthem. ESPN has covered the thing all day. It's a nationally televised game. And so right after the national anthem, those kids released those gold balloons with the notes to Daddy, and they floated to the heavens. I mean, it was pretty sweet. And then the crowd gave them a standing ovation, and it was just the neatest thing. Okay, one more quick story. We were in Hy-Vee a couple of months ago, about 3 now. Guy stops, he said, I've got a friend suffering from Agent Orange, and he just wants to know if you and Yvonne are considering doing an honor flight for Vietnam veterans. We get asked a lot. And so he said that he's not going to be around long. He just wants to know if you guys will think about it. Well, that weighed on us pretty heavily. So we decided to do it. So what's going to happen on D-Day, June 6th, first big donation came from Sid Dinsdale. Sent us a check for $25,000 to start off on the Vietnam combat veteran flight. We're taking all combat guys. We're taking 3 planes on the same day, 500 guys. It's the biggest crowd of Vietnam veterans from one state ever to visit the wall. So it's going to be a big media deal in D.C. as well. So that's what we're going to do. The pre-flight dinner will be out at the Embassy Convention Center. We'll probably put 1,800 in there on Sunday night, June 5th, and then the first plane lifts off. The red plane lifts off at 4 o'clock. Second one, white, goes at 4:20, and blue goes at 4:45. So we have a full day in Washington, and then we'll be back. It's going to be a little earlier than usual. It'll be 9:15, 9:30, 9:45. So we're going to try to exceed the 3,000 that were there to greet the Korea guys. So the airport kind of frowns on it, but you know, tough. It'll be a crowd. I mean, there won't be a parking spot in that parking garage. They'll all be taken. So it'll be neat. So that's what we're going to do for the combat guys, and we've got 570, with today's mail, there's 573 applications from all over the state. And Yvonne and I aren't qualified to pick, so we've got a couple of combat Vietnam guys that are going through the stack and looking at their DD-214s and their applications, because we want to make sure that we get it down to the most deserving on the ground, and that's going to be mostly Army and Marine Corps, but get the most deserving guys on this flight. So that's what we're working on. So anyway, that's what's coming up, and I've talked long enough. Anybody have a question for me? Or thank you to the Dinsdales for helping me.
It's been a long ride.
That was 07 when you helped me.
Was it really?
That's how long ago
Yeah.
it was.
I
Fall
remember
of 07.
you had them all ride up on a bus to the old depot, and we had dinner in there that night.
Down at the Durham.
Yeah.
That's right.
That was the motorcycle group.
Oh, there was, Legion Riders, PGR up and down the street.
That was
Yeah, I tell you,
impressive.
the people in Braddock know what you and Yvonne have done is really something. I had one friend that gave you a lot of money, and I don't think you ever knew about him, but he told me, Roy, he said, I've given a lot of money to things, but that one thing made me feel better than anything I've ever done.
Is that right? It's been great. I mean, it's been fun. It's interesting how little complaining happens. I remember one time at Dulles we were delayed because they used to take guys and they'd try to TSA screen them. So ridiculous. I mean, with canes and metal hips and stuff, and they're wanding them and it goes off. I said, what do you think's gonna happen, man? So anyway, we used to get into it with them, and so one time we're out on the tarmac and we were delayed, and I got on this bus. I could still see this guy, one of our World War II guys, sitting in the front seat with his arms folded. I said, guys, I'm sorry about the delay. And he said, Bill, don't worry about it. He said, I sit here or I sit in the nursing home. This is a heck of a lot better than that. So that's how you have to put it in perspective of what their day is like. And that's what's been great about it, because it gives those veterans something to look forward to, and things that we consider a negative, like the terrible weather on that Korea flight, to them, what they remember when we run into them on the street or a loved one is that they talk about what happened when they walked into Epley on the return, when you see 3,000 people there. So, and it's really, it's kind of odd, but it's easier for us to take a whole bunch than it is to do a flight, wait 2 months, and then start all over again. So it's easier to take 3 planes, and we've done it so long because we go all out on this deal. We put tour guides on the buses because a lot of these guys have never been there before. So instead of looking out the window and wondering what stuff is, we have tour guides that explain left and right, and this is this and this is that. And then we also have escort cars from the Capitol Police. So you put, well, for this Vietnam thing, there'll be 12 buses. So there's 3 groups, red, white, and blue, of 4 buses each. So there'll be a police car in the front and a police car behind, so that when they leave Korea, headed to the next place, they're led by sirens and lights. So they don't stop for red lights. So they all look out the window and say, wonder what's going on. Well, then they realize it's for them. It's just those small touches that make it fun, and they're so appreciative. So
Are they from, the tour guides, are they from back there?
they're all there. We always ask for the same. We get the same people. We ask for the same bus drivers. We tip well. They all want to do the Nebraska group. We have there's a food guy. He's an Arby's distributor, and Ace is his name. Most reliable person, and he shows up in his truck, and each guy gets a box with a fruit cup and chips and ice water and this huge sandwich as big as a football, and everybody gets one. It's just everything gets taken care of, and so it's a neat day. It's a long day. Some states will do it over 2 or 3 days, but see, we never wanted to do that because now you're dealing with luggage. Now you're dealing with medicines for multiple days. It's just a lot tougher deal. I'll tell you a quick story about what happened. We helped an Iowa flight. They called us and asked us if we come over and help them. They had 2 planes, and they wanted us to do one, so we took some Guardians over. Our best Guardian, she's since died. This will be our first flight without her. Name's, well, I don't want to say. Anyway, what happened was we're on the tarmac at Dulles. She came up and in tears, and she said, I just made a terrible mistake. She said, I gave pills to the wrong veteran.
Oh, no.
So I called the Guardians over and I said, all right, here's the deal. I said, see that guy standing over by the bus? Well, he just swallowed 12 pills he wasn't supposed to get. I said, if he drops dead, God took him. We didn't kill him. Everybody got it? So the doctor, one of our doctors from Lincoln came over. I said, Dirk, we have a problem. So we take the list of the pills that this guy inadvertently swallowed. And the doctor looks at it, looks at the guy, looks at it, and says, there's nothing there that'll kill him. Now, if we swallowed 12 pills we weren't supposed to get, there might be an effect from that. But in this case,
is that where the Viagra ended up?
Well, they couldn't get the casket closed.
I was going to ask you, which hospice did you volunteer at?
Well, Sarah Care. Yeah, I did it for.
8 years?
I think it was that long. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a long time.
Kelly would give me patients, and I'd go around and visit with them. And
Where's that at?
Sarah Care, the office is on 87th and Center.
Okay.
Yeah.
but anyway, if anybody's around on D-Day, June 6th, that night, you might come out to the airport. It'll be a neat thing to see, and so it'll be fun.
What time?
First one comes in at 9:15, supposedly. So, and then we're doing the home front. The home fronts is the activities for the wives. And we started that at the very beginning because we had all these wives coming in from all over the state. We thought, what are they going to do all day? Sit in a hotel room while the boys are off at war? So we came up with activities. Well, the best part of it was at night they would have a pizza party. And so they would talk about, particularly the World War II wives, because they would talk about what they did. Because I always envisioned where the wife stood next to the husband for decades, right? And somebody would say, Harvey, what'd you do during the war? Well, you know, I was in the, and they'd go into a spiel about what he did. How many times do you think anybody ever turned to that wife and said, well, what did you do during the war years? Well, I was raising our firstborn child in a cold water flat in Philadelphia while he was in Europe. Well, nobody ever asked the women those questions. And so that's what the home front was. So they would all open up about what it was like and how fearful it was and the reports and et cetera. So that's how home front started, and we did it for everyone. So on this Vietnam thing, we think we'll probably have 7, 8 bus loads, and they're going to go from the Embassy Suites, Marriott Courtyard, they own the same owner next door. They're going to go to Lincoln, they're going to get a behind-the-scenes tour of the stadium, they're going down to the Haymarket to that train station for a lunch hosted by the First Lady. Then they're going to split up and go around here or there, and then we're going to bus them over to a winery by Bennett that I found out about and got that worked out. Then they'll come back to Omaha, rest up for a little bit, load the buses again, and then they'll go to the airport. And we'll have them make signs. We had one on the Korea one. Woman in a wheelchair, husband comes up in his wheelchair. They're trying to hug each other. She has a sign that says, "Missed you, sugar britches." So they're trying to hug each other in their wheelchairs. I mean, some of the stuff that happens is just, it's really touching. So it's fun. But anyway, I've gone too long.
Oh, no, you've been good. Any other questions?
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.